Look at this photograph. This is not a plane that should be flying. It is a ghost, a wreck held together by sheer will and rivets. Yet, it flew. This was the Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress. It was more than an aircraft. It was a promise. A promise that American air power could fly into the heart of Nazi Germany in broad daylight, absorb unimaginable punishment, and still fly home. This is the story of the unkillable bomber and the incredible courage of the 10-man crews who flew it through the deadliest skies in human history. In the early 1940s, the United States Army Air Forces was built around a radical, unproven idea: that a war could be won by air power alone. The doctrine was called high-altitude, daylight precision bombing. The theory was that a massive force of heavily armed bombers could fight its way to strategic targets: ball-bearing factories, aircraft plants, oil refineries, and surgically destroy Germany's ability to wage war, making a bloody ground invasion unnecessary. The instrument designed to execute this audacious plan was the B-17 Flying Fortress. This deep dive will reveal that while the precision bombing theory was deeply flawed, the B-17's legendary toughness and the unimaginable bravery of its crews became the blunt instrument that systematically decimated the German Luftwaffe, paving the way for Allied victory in Europe. The B-17 earned its name for one reason: it was the most heavily armed bomber of its time. The later G model, the definitive version, bristled with 13.50 caliber M2 Browning machine guns. It had a tail gunner, 2 waist gunners, a ball turret gunner, a top turret gunner, and a nose-mounted chin turret. The plan was simple and brutal. Hundreds of these fortresses would fly in a staggered, interlocking combat box formation. This tactic, developed by Colonel Curtis LeMay, was designed so that the guns of each bomber would provide protective fire for its neighbors, creating a self-defending hedgehog of firepower that was, in theory, impenetrable to enemy fighters. It was a vision of American industrial might, a flying machine designed to absorb punishment and dish it out in equal measure. The year 1943 was when the theory of the self-defending bomber was put to its most brutal test. The 8th Air Force began launching deep penetration raids into Germany. Far beyond the range of any available Allied fighter escort, the bomber crews were on their own. The Luftwaffe's pilots were experts. They quickly identified the B-17's frontal weakness and developed devastating head-on attack strategies, flying directly into the teeth of the formation. The results were catastrophic. On October 14, 1943, a date that would become infamous as Black Thursday, the 8th Air Force launched a second raid on the ball-bearing factories at Schweinfurt. Of the 291 fortresses sent on the mission, 60 were shot down. Another 17 were so badly damaged they were scrapped. Over 120 more returned with battle damage. That's a staggering loss rate of over 26%. The self-defending bomber theory was a bloody failure. The losses were unsustainable. Daylight bombing deep into Germany was temporarily halted. It was a victory for the Luftwaffe, but a Pyrrhic one. The B-17s had proven they could reach their targets, and the sheer ferocity of their gunners had inflicted devastating losses on the German fighter force. But out of the carnage of 1943, a legend was born. Not of invincibility, but of survivability. The B-17 was built like a tank. Stories and photographs began to circulate that were almost unbelievable. There was the story of the All-American, which was rammed by a German fighter that sliced its tail nearly clean off. The tail gunner was trapped, but the plane remained controllable, and the crew flew it back to a safe landing in England. There were fortresses that returned with their noses blown off, with massive holes in their wings, with multiple engines on fire. As one pilot famously said, They were the easiest planes in the world to fly and the hardest to kill. This incredible toughness created a deep, abiding faith between the crews and their aircraft. The USAF learned the bloody lessons of 1943. The definitive version of the Fortress, the B-17G, was introduced. It featured one critical upgrade that changed the fight: a remote-controlled Bendix chin turret with 2 more .50 caliber machine guns. This finally solved the problem of the head-on attack. German pilots could no longer approach from the front with impunity. But the most important change was the arrival of the Little Friends. With the introduction of the long-range North American P-51 Mustang, the bomber streams finally had a fighter escort that could take them all the way to the target and back. This was the turning point of the air war. The B-17s were no longer just prey. They were the bait. The Luftwaffe was now forced to fight its way through a swarm of America's best fighters just to get a shot at the bombers. This new combination was unstoppable. The P-51s decimated the German fighters, and the B-17s systematically destroyed the German war economy. The strategic bombing survey conducted after the war concluded that the air campaign was decisive in the war in Western Europe. The B-17 and their B-24 counterparts crippled German oil production, reducing the Luftwaffe's fuel supply to a trickle and grounding their advanced jet fighters. They smashed aircraft factories and choked the transportation system. While the idea of precision bombing was never truly realized, the sheer, relentless, attritional power of the B-17 campaign was overwhelming. Over 12,000 fortresses were built. They dropped over 640,000 tons of bombs on Nazi Germany. While the numbers are heavily debated and often inflated, B-17 gunners claim to have shot down thousands of enemy fighters, bleeding the Luftwaffe of its experienced pilots day after day. The cost of this victory was staggering. The 8th Air Force suffered over 47,000 casualties, including more than 26,000 killed, more than the entire U.S. Marine Corps in the war. The young men who flew the B-17 faced odds that are difficult to comprehend. The B-17 Flying Fortress was not a perfect weapon. Its doctrine was flawed, and its losses were horrific. But its legend is undeniable. It was an unkillable machine, flown by an unbreakable generation. It was the blunt instrument that broke the Luftwaffe, crippled German industry, and ultimately helped seal the fate of the Third Reich. The strategic bombing campaign is one of the most controversial topics of the war. Do you believe it was the decisive factor in defeating Germany? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We read everyone. If you appreciate this kind of deep dive into military history, be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. Thank you for watching.